Let's now come to chapter 7 of this book, that is Bharat as a Civilization. The author J.Sai Deepak tells us about a British author and columnist, Martin Jacks, who proposed about a decade ago that China was a civilization state and Europe was a nation state. Hence, you cannot compare the realities or the organizational structures of the two entities. While Europe's idea of nation was based on territorial distinctions, China's idea of a civilization state was based on a live reality that all of the Chinese people had gone through together. Similar argument was propounded in 2014 by Dr. Koenraad Elst, who wrote a piece on his blog titled India as a Civilization State. Bharat too must make a case for a civilization state. Now, he justified and made a case that why India was also a civilization state, and his ideas were also propounded by important leaders of our generation, such as Ajit Doval, who is also the National Security Advisor of India. Then the author said J.Sai Deepak starts quoting important scholars during the colonial times and who wrote elsewhere to justify Hinduism or the Indic consciousness as a civilization and the idea of Bharat as a civilization state even before the colonialism happened. He starts by giving us the example of Harbilas Sarda, whose book Hindu Superiority, an attempt to determine the position of the Hindu race in the scale of nations of 1906, is a very relevant book in this regard. In this particular book, he tells us that the native identity of Bharat, being the Indic Hindu identity, never appeared to be a matter of contestation because it uses a Hindu civilization. Harbilas Sarda in his book uses the term Hindu civilization to refer to Bharat as a lived reality, and hence the native identity of the people living there was never a matter of contestation, as it was a lived reality that they all lived together. And he uses the term Hindu civilization to refer to them. And secondly, a harmonious relationship with nature is one of the key aspects of the Indic consciousness. Now, these two aspects, that is a common Hindu identity and the harmonious relationship with nature, both of them are central to the Indic consciousness. That is, no matter where you go in India, the original Indian OET or Indian frameworks had these two centralities in them, and hence there was a commonality between all of them. He further tells us that Gnana or knowledge is true religion of Bharat as opposed to one particular religious scripture. He also tells us that past cannot be judged through the present lens, as the past has its own framework and its own time frame. You cannot put the present lens and judge it or even criticize it in that regard. He further tells us that the definition of Hindu religion in his book, uh, Harbilas Sarda in his book tells us that Hindu religion is the knowledge and comprehension of those eternal principles which govern nature and man. Those immutable laws, which in one sphere are called science, in another true philosophy. It does not concern itself with things which are true under certain conditions like other religions. It concerns itself with things which are ever true in the past, true in the present, or true in the future. Hence, the idea of religion is very different in the Hindu fold. He further tells us that Sanatan Dharma is not done justice when looked at from a colonial Christian OET, because Christianity's lens is based on a particular book. Their idea of a religion is very different from Hindu religion, which talks about eternal principles that not only govern a human being but also nature and all of reality. Hence, the Christian OET or Christian framework could not look at the Sanatan Dharma or Hinduism as a religion, because it was not a religion according to their framework and their ideas of religion. They could not understand how ethnicity and religion are not relevant to Hinduism, and they are not relevant to the Sanatan Dharma because its principles circumscribe the globe and govern all of humanity, unlike the Christianity. Hence, it can have in its own fold Indians, Arabs, Europeans, Americans, African, Chinese, or anyone which subscribe to these ideas. Rad- Radha Kumod Mukherjee or R.K. Mukherjee also built a lot on this regard and wrote a lot of books talking about Hinduism as a civilization from 1912 onwards. His one of the first important books in this regard was The Fundamental Unity of India, which he wrote in 1914. He talked about civilizational oneness through the unification of its geography. That is, Indian landmass or Indian subcontinent has a unique geography which is united. And despite the diversity that meets the eye, this common geography has a lot of common elements that the people have lived through. And because there is the unification of this geography despite the diversity that is visible to the naked eye of the colonizer cannot claim remotely that they have created or unified India, because India was a lived reality even before the colonization process happened, be it European colonization or the Middle Eastern colonization. And this is so because India had the possession of a fixed common country. As the geography was the fixed entity, a feeling of community was created between India as a civilizational entity. This commonality led to the creation of similar culture, language, and literature that had certain common elements to all of India, even though particular regional diversity might be there, but certain commonality or common elements between culture, language, literature were ever present in India. He then cites authorities on Bharat's geography like Vincent Arthur Smith and George Chisholm, and they tell us that India, encircled as she is by seas and mountains, is indisputably a geographical unit, and as such is rightly designated by one name of India or Bharat. They also further tell us that there is no part of the world better marked out by nature as a region by itself than India, apart from maybe Burma. And even though it is a region that is full of contrast in physical features, but the features that divide it from other nations or other countries are too large as a whole to be overlooked. And hence, this distinct geographical entity has ever been present with India because of its geographical features and how it's divided by the seas and the mountains. Because this geographical unity enables the feeling of community, the monochromatic concept of nation, according to the European OET or the colonizer's lens, does not do justice to the idea of Bharat. With that, we come to the end of the first part of chapter 7.